The alarm clock blared. 6 a.m. Laurence Zion, a man who valued his sleep, groaned and slammed his fist down on the alarm clock. Why was he up so early? Oh, right. Donuts. His boss, Mr. Bigglesworth, had specifically requested Laurence pick up the sugary treats for the morning meeting. Since when did I become the office errand boy? Laurence mumbled, throwing on his least wrinkled shirt. The drive to the office was uneventful. Arriving at the office, he placed the donut box on the table. Brenda, the actual office secretary, is not here. Brenda's not here? Why even have a secretary if she doesn't show up? Thought Laurence. He then sipped his coffee and realized it was cold. And it's cold. Brenda's the only one allowed to use the microwave. And of course she's not here. I hope Mr. Bigglesworth doesn't see me. I just want to do my job, said Laurence. Lawrence's cubicle was his sanctuary. The moment he sat down, his peace was shattered. Laurence, buddy, do me a solid and go get my documents from the printer. It was Greg, the devious coworker, leaning over the cubicle wall. Laurence stared at the error message flashing on the printer screen. Paper jam. Low ink. You've got to be kidding me, Laurence muttered. He opened the printer, desperately hoping to find a stray sheet of paper. Empty. He checked the ink cartridge. Bone dry. Of course, Laurence sighed. Just my luck. He returned to his cubicle, defeated. He found Greg and Mr. Bigglesworth huddled around his computer screen. What's going on? Laurence asked. Your computer seems to be having some issues, Mr. Bigglesworth said. Perhaps you should check the supply room. For ink and paper? Laurence wanted to scream. Right on it, Mr. Bigglesworth. First, Laurence went to the printer because he didn't want to start a fight with Greg, and now he is sent to the supply room. Again, not my job, he murmured. It was a dark and dusty cavern filled with forgotten office supplies. Laurence flicked on the light switch. Nothing. He fumbled for his phone, using the dim light to navigate. Boxes of paper clips, staples, and rubber bands towered over him. Where did they even keep the printer supplies? After what felt like an eternity, he stumbled upon a shelf labeled printer ink. His heart leaped with hope. He scanned the cartridges. Cyan, magenta, yellow, no black. Are you kidding me? Laurence groaned. Laurence emerged from the supply room, covered in dust and defeat. He found Mr. Bigglesworth pacing in front of his office. Well, Laurence, Mr. Bigglesworth asked, did you find the supplies? Laurence wanted to tell him about the barren wasteland that was the supply room. But instead, he simply shook his head. No, sir. There's no black ink or paper. Mr. Bigglesworth sighed. Unbelievable. This is why I can't stand leaving the office for even a day. Complete chaos. He paused, and Laurence thought he saw a flicker of sympathy in his boss's eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. Just focus on your own work for now, Laurence. I'll deal with this printer situation. Laurence retreated to his cubicle, back in the relative safety of his cubicle. Laurence tried to regain his composure. He took a deep breath and opened his email. The usual flood of company-wide announcements, meeting requests, and spam awaited him. He scrolled through them, deleting as he went. Then he saw it. An email with the subject line, Urgent Request, Project J. Project J? Laurence vaguely remembered hearing whispers about it around the office. It was a top-secret project, rumored to be the next big thing for the company. He clicked on the email. The sender was someone he didn't recognize. The message was short and to the point. They needed a specific part for Project J, and they needed it today. Laurence scrolled down, his eyes widening in disbelief. Laurence stared at the email, his mind reeling. This had to be a joke. He marched towards Mr. Bigglesworth's office. Mr. Bigglesworth? About this email? Ah, yes. Project J. Very important. I trust you'll take care of it, Laurence? But, sir, it's practically impossible to get this thing. And by today? Nonsense, Laurence. Just give them a call. And track down Brenda. I need her to send out a memo. Sir, Brenda's on maternity leave. Oh, right. You're in charge of all secretarial duties until she returns. Laurence wanted to scream. He was now the office secretary, on top of everything else. Laurence stumbled out of the office building and into the bustling city streets. The noise and chaos that usually faded into the background were amplified. He just needed to get to the factory, talk to someone, anyone who could make this madness stop. He fumbled for his car keys, his hands shaking slightly. He unlocked the car, tossed his briefcase onto the passenger seat, and sank into the driver's seat with a groan. Turning the key in the ignition, he was met with the familiar roar of the engine. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to imagine he was driving far away from the office. The sound of a car horn jolted him back to reality. 5 minutes into his drive, the traffic ground to a halt. Laurence drummed his fingers impatiently on the steering wheel. Up ahead, an elderly man with a cane was slowly making his way across the crosswalk. A young woman had stopped her car to let him pass, and several other drivers had followed suit. Laurence could feel his blood pressure rising. He leaned on his horn, a sharp, impatient blast that echoed through the air. The young woman who had stopped to help the man glanced back at him, her expression a mixture of annoyance and pity. Shame washed over Laurence. He mumbled an apology. Traffic began to move again, but Laurence sat there for a moment, his anger replaced by a strange sense of melancholy. He took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. Laurence inched forward, his car moving at a snail's pace. The elderly man was a distant memory, but the traffic jam lingered. Laurence drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, his frustration mounting. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard. He was already late. He reached for the radio, hoping to find some music to drown out the noise of his own thoughts. Static. He flipped through the channels, but it was all the same. Even the radio was against him today. He slammed his hand down on the volume knob, silencing the static. The insistent ringing of his cell phone shattered the silence. Laurence groaned. Of course. He fumbled for his phone, his eyes still glued to the road. It was Greg, calling to ask if Laurence could pick up his dry cleaning. Seriously, Greg? Laurence muttered through gritted teeth. I'm on my way to the factory for Project J, remember? Oh, right, Greg said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. Laurence tuned out Greg's rambling, his attention shifting to the car in front of him, which had slammed on its brakes. He swerved to avoid a collision, his heart pounding in his chest. After what felt like an eternity, Laurence finally pulled into the factory parking lot. He could feel the tension draining from his shoulders as he stepped out of the car. The air here was different, cleaner, filled with the hum of machinery and the scent of freshly cut wood. He made his way through the maze of corridors, his footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. He finally found the production manager's office, a small, cluttered space that smelled faintly of sawdust and coffee. The production manager, a burly man with a handlebar mustache and a permanent frown, looked up from his desk as Laurence entered. "Can I help you?" the production manager asked gruffly. Laurence took a deep breath. Here goes nothing. He explained about Project J, about the impossible request and the even more impossible deadline. The production manager listened patiently, his frown deepening with each passing sentence. When Laurence was finished, the production manager leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. Lawrence's shoulders slumped. "So, it can't be done?" Laurence asked, his voice laced with defeat. The production manager, a man who looked like he'd wrestled a forklift and won, squinted at the email printout. He stroked his handlebar mustache as if deep in thought. "Not by the end of the day, no. This thing requires time, precision, a whole lot of elbow grease." Laurence was annoyed. "Are you joking? That shit needs to be done today." "Watch your language," the production manager exclaimed. "This thing would take weeks, maybe months to get right. It's like asking a blacksmith to build a spaceship in an afternoon. Possible? Maybe. Practical? Not a chance." Laurence wanted to argue and negotiate something just so he can get this ridiculous task off his plate. But he knew it was pointless. "All right," Laurence said, voice flat. "But could you at least start on it?" "I can come back later." The production manager grunted, already turning back to the mountain of paperwork on his desk. Fine. But don't expect miracles." Laurence left the factory floor feeling like he was caught in a hamster wheel. He had a few hours to kill before he could return for the miracle product. He might as well make himself useful, however ridiculous the tasks. His phone rang. It was Sarah from accounting. Could he pick up a prescription for her? Then came a call from Mark in marketing. He needed a very specific birthday cake, chocolate with raspberry filling, but absolutely no fondant. It was outrageous tasks like these that slowly made Laurence go insane. He felt like he did 100 of those meaningless tasks. But luckily, 4 hours passed, and he was back at the factory, his nerves even more frayed. The smell of sawdust and machine oil did little to calm him. He practically ran to the production manager's office. The production manager looked up, his expression unchanged. "Is it ready?" Laurence asked, ignoring the jab. The production manager chuckled. "Ready? This ain't a drive-through. Just tell me if you have it or not." He opened a drawer and pulled out a small lumpy package. Laurence ripped the paper off, his heart sinking. It was not what he had in mind. He grabbed the package and stormed out of the factory. The drive back to the city was even worse than the drive out. Rush hour traffic had transformed the highway into a parking lot, a sea of brake lights and frustrated drivers. Laurence gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, the lumpy package digging into his leg. He could feel his temper simmering, threatening to boil over. A beat-up pickup truck in front of him kept tapping its brakes, inching forward with agonizing slowness. Laurence leaned on his horn, a long, angry blast that did nothing to alleviate the traffic jam but did succeed in making a nearby baby cry. He winced, guilt washing over him. He was turning into a monster, a road-raging, errand-running monster. He tried to distract himself, flipping through the radio stations. Still nothing but static and commercials. He glanced at his phone, tempted to call someone, anyone, just to hear a friendly voice. But who was he kidding? Everyone he knew was probably already enjoying their evening, blissfully unaware of his descent into errand-induced madness. Laurence saw flashing lights in his rearview mirror. His heart sank. Not the police. Not now. He pulled over, his mind racing. Had he been speeding? A young police officer approached, his expression unreadable. He asked for Lawrence's license and registration. Laurence complied, his hands shaking. He subjected Laurence to sobriety tests. Laurence passed with flying colors. By the time Laurence made it back, the sun had set, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. He felt drained, like he'd run a marathon with a backpack full of bricks. He stumbled into his cubicle, his briefcase feeling heavier than ever. He flipped on the desk lamp, illuminating his computer screen, or rather, what was left of it. The screen was blank, except for a few flickering lines. He pressed the power button, but nothing happened. His computer was dead. He marched to Mr. Bigglesworth's office, his patience gone. He flung the door open, startling his boss. "Mr. Bigglesworth," Laurence said, "my computer is broken." Mr. Bigglesworth sighed. "Yes, Laurence. Sarah from accounting spilled water on your keyboard. She'll cover the cost of the repairs." Laurence stared, struggling to process this. It was like the universe was conspiring against him. "So, what am I supposed to do now?" "Well, you can check your emails from home," Mr. Bigglesworth said. "Just make sure to respond to any urgent requests." The drive home was a blur. Laurence navigated the city streets on autopilot, his mind numb with exhaustion and a growing sense of despair. He barely registered the honking horns, the flashing neon signs, the endless stream of headlights and taillights. He was running on fumes, both literally and figuratively. He pulled into his driveway, the engine sputtering its last. He sat there for a moment, dreading the thought of stepping back into his empty apartment, a stark reminder of his solitary existence. Yet half a mind to just sleep in his car. At least here, in the relative quiet of his driveway, no one could ask him to pick up their dry cleaning or procure an impossible-to-find object. But even his body, as exhausted as it was, craved the comfort of his own bed. He dragged himself out of the car, his briefcase thumping against his leg with each step. He unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and closed the door behind him, shutting out the noise and chaos of the city. He went straight to his computer, ignoring the pile of unopened mail. He dreaded checking his work email. 2 new messages awaited him. The first was from the anonymous sender of the Project J email. "Change of plans. Don't need the part after all." Laurence stared at the screen, his mind struggling to comprehend. He clicked on the second email, a message from Mr. Bigglesworth. "Laurence, I need you to be in the office by 5 a.m. sharp tomorrow." Laurence stared at the email, his vision blurring. He had officially reached his breaking point. He slammed his laptop shut, the image of Mr. Bigglesworth assembling a diaper genie seared into his brain. He collapsed onto the bed, wanting to cry, but even his tears had abandoned him. Lawrence's apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling trapped in a nightmare. His phone buzzed, reminding him of his 5 a.m. team building exercise. He imagined a deserted island, white sand, turquoise water, but the fantasy was shattered by the buzzing phone. He sat up, his head spinning, and reached for his phone. He took a deep breath, a shuddering gasp for air, and then, with a roar, Laurence finally snapped. Subscribe to see more of Lawrence's adventures.